Thanks for joining me today. My name's Alex Chiocchi, and I'm here to talk about what I'm calling the upcoming renaissance of Super-dApps. So you've probably heard of dApps, but there are no Super-dApps yet, and we'll talk about what that could look like. And I'm with Pagoda, which is a major contributor to the Near protocol, and I'm the chief product officer there. So I'm going to share a little bit of my perspective of my journey in Web3, why Web3 is actually more centralized still than we really realize, why we need something new, what a Super-dApp is, and what I'm doing to bring this, hopefully, future forward. So first, my perspective. So my background, I was originally started a product career at LinkedIn, was there working with hundreds of millions of users. Then we got acquired by Microsoft. And after that, I did my own startup until I ended up doing some open source contributions, and that led me to Kraken. And I was the VP of product at Kraken for a little while. And I worked on things like Polkadot parachain auctions, ETH2 validator and staking, and Bitcoin Lightning. And most recently, I joined Near and Pagoda within Near because I've always had a feeling that user experiences could also become decentralized, and that Near was going to be the best protocol to be able to do that, and I'll explain more about that later. So let's talk about the open web, and I think there's really been two big epochs in the history of the open web. So first, of course, is Bitcoin, which gave us public ledgers and predictable value of currency. And then we had Ethereum, which started automating trust and complex financial transactions through smart contracts. But we haven't really seen like a revolutionary step there afterwards in terms of like decentralizing major parts of the technology stack. And that's led us on the front end to actually be in a centralized duopoly. So on the left here we have, or rather the right for you, the Apple App Store, where there's a 30% essentially Apple tax on transactions that happen there. And there's a single place in which Apple has enforcement on all of the apps that get submitted there. That's led to certain conflicts, you might say, of interest. You've seen with like Riot and Coinbase and others, and including Meta and advertising. And the rules are kind of changing all the time. It's unclear. It kind of seems sometimes it's for community good. Sometimes it might be for their own economic gain. Those things are being played out in court cases as we speak. And then on the other side, we have Google Play Store, which has a much lower percentage, more reasonable at 15%. And what happens there actually, though, is that when you do complex transactions or complex actions, your data is being routed through their centralized servers, which means there is a trail in which they can kind of create a fingerprint that they then sell into advertising systems. And you may or may not be okay with that. Some people are, many people aren't. And there actually have been a number of projects that have kind of tried to fight back against this duopoly, if you will. But it's really, really difficult unless you're very, very wealthy already. So you have Alexa with Amazon, which is actually a forked version of Android underneath. They have their own operating system in which all those devices run on. They're a $1 trillion company. It's fairly closed source still. So not exactly something that the average community or average person can really be empowered by. You've seen that Audible still to this day doesn't do digital goods transactions for their audiobooks through apps. It's all done through a mobile website because they don't want to pay that Apple tax or the Google tax. And then you may or may not know about a project 7 or 8 years ago called Firefox OS, which was actually an attempt to build an open source operating system for all sorts of different devices, whether it be mobile phones or TVs or even browsers. Unfortunately, it didn't quite take off. There were some internal conflicts, but I think they had a lot of the right idea in terms of creating, again, a more open web, open source version of a front-end publishing platform. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, we still always have a client-server website, right? We have a website in which we can, deploy our software, and the web is still, TCP/IP is an open protocol. And things like Wikipedia and Uniswap exist in this, and they're great public goods, and they're not forced by that duopoly. And that's true to a certain extent, but there is a lot of risk that comes with a centralized client server. Wikipedia is constantly under attack. If you know anybody that works in that foundation or community, constantly under attack by different governments and different, I'd say non-nation state actors. And Uniswap, if you've seen the news, has had a lot of complications as well in terms of their continued operations of their front end. So I think this kind of sets the stage that we need something new, right? The existing paradigms really aren't meeting the promises of decentralization and Web3, owning your own data, owning your own value, right? Being able to have transparency in how things work. And I think there are a few principles that we need to have in this new system. So I'm a product person, so I'm going to talk about principles and features before we get into any solutions. So first is whatever this open operating system is needs to be self-sovereign. So people need to be able to bring their data in, and it needs to be able to run in itself. There needs to be low-tech literacy. So if you look at all of those platforms, whether it was Google Play or iOS, they're very accessible to billions of people. There are 5 billion people that use those sorts of devices as today, and it doesn't require deep technical knowledge. There needs to be a consistent user experience. So this is something that I think us as an industry are starting to get a little bit better at, but we don't quite have all of the, I would say, design systems thinking that Web 2 has that has actually allowed for these things to propagate as fast as they have. So 2 things that you may or may not be aware of, unless you do a lot of front-end development, but if you've seen Bootstrap, that actually came out of Twitter, and that helped propagate social experiences across the web over the last 10 years, and it really made it easier for people to understand how to do social interactions, as well as made it easier for developers to have consistent patterns that they didn't have to re-engineer themselves all the time. So it's a great example there. Android Material Design is another example, where we had the inclusion of things like search and calendar into very simple, consistent patterns of experiences for users to enjoy, and it made it very easy for developers because they were just libraries that could be used with minor customizations for your branding. And finally, community, commerce, and communication all need to be able to function in this operating system seamlessly. And you see this to varying degrees in social networks today or in super apps like WeChat, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's talk about product requirements. So those are kind of more like philosophic principles of things that we need to do. It needs to be decentralized. I think we've kind of established why that's very important, and I think we all understand the advantages of that. It needs to be fully open source. So somebody could go build an operating system, and then another person could fork that, use it in a different region or for a different purpose. It needs to work on any device. This is actually a really hard problem, both technically and from a design perspective. So TVs, computers, tablets, smartphones, maybe even a refrigerator, right? And it needs to not be monetized on ads. Ads create, I think, a difficult incentive structure in which we're seeing play out. Doesn't always lead to the best user experiences for people. It emphasizes attention over value for people. And I think there's a lot of creative ways you can do monetization without resulting to ads. So that leads to Super-dApps, right? These are the principles and the product features that we need to get there. But first, let's talk about what a super app is. Some of you may already know what that is, some of you may not. And I think it's really important to see there are a few really cool super apps in the world right now, many of which we don't actually get to have in the West and the United States. So the first and most iconic is WeChat. This really is a really fascinating super app. It allows you to do pretty much anything in your daily commerce. For those that are from China, it's probably a daily part of your life, or for many of your friends. It allows you to use mini applets within it. It allows you to communicate, and it's like a chat-based experience. Paytm is in India, and it actually started as like a prepaid mobile phone app, and it slowly started to include a lot of different services like rideshare and financial services and a bunch of really cool things. And Gojek is in Indonesia, excuse me. And it also started in the gig services business and started to expand to many, many different parts of people's lives as well. But all of them have three things in common: communication, commerce, and some level of social network. And here's some screenshots of it. So, if you look again, I think the Gojek one is probably the easiest to see. You can go get a ride, you can go get food, you can go find deals for clipping coupons where you're buying at the supermarket. You can send things to other people, and there's tons and tons of different little micro applet experiences within this super app. Now, the problem with these existing super apps, as much as they've been super economically empowering for people in these countries, is they're still controlled by one centralized entity. And that has some incentive issues in which I think that Super-dApps could actually bring the same user experience and fix the incentive issues, and I'll get into that. So, I think they could be even better. And the main concept, it's an economic concept as to why Super-dApps would be better than super apps, is a concept of comparative advantage. And so just to go through this fairly grainy image here, what you have here is that if one country, and you can think of a country as a company or a DAO or a project, is better at producing one good. So let's say, in country B's example you see here, if it only produced milk, it would be able to produce 8 units of milk. But if it produces milk and sugar, right, it actually can only produce 6 pieces of sugar and 4 pieces of milk. So as opposed to country A can do 10 goods of sugar and 4 goods of milk. And so if you go down that scale, if you specialize in one good over another good, you have a comparative advantage, and then that's actually where you hope free trade comes in, where countries that are best at producing milk trade with countries that are best at producing sugar. They all have lower unit economic cost, and they all get more goods. Now, free trade is not going as well as it used to in the last, I would say, 10, 20 years, but the beautiful thing about crypto and crypto economies is that everything is open source and everything is permissible. And so the concept of comparative advantage for different services can actually play out in its economic theory in the right way possible. So what that means is if somebody were to create an operating system that allowed for Super-dApps, you could have entire communities that come up with different services that have strong comparative advantages that a user would get the benefits of. So what could that be as an example? Well, you might say that the Ethereum community has got the best opportunities for DeFi, right? That there's a comparative advantage in doing DeFi there. And that's why there's the most TVL that's there right now. And that you might say that, and I'm giving a hypothetical, that the Solana community is actually better at NFTs because they have a lot of creators. From a user's perspective, if they could have both Solana NFTs and Ethereum DeFi, they would get the best of both worlds if it was in one super app experience and join the comparative advantages of those two different ecosystems. So really what we're saying here is that our own tribalism is actually limiting the experience of users to be able to enjoy all the benefits of the crypto economy. Something for us all to think about. So what am I doing to help accelerate this? Well, I am working on what's called the blockchain operating system. So it's an open source operating system that Near is creating, and it has basically any compatibility with any of the other blockchains, and it creates a front-end layer that is not centralized. The JavaScript, the HTML, the CSS is all rendered and served through our validator network, our protocol, and that allows for people to build experiences that are decentralized, and what we want to get to to equip people with the frameworks and the design systems to be able to build their own super apps. So here's an example of what it looks like today. It's on alpha.near.org, and you see on the left is this component system where you can actually build these front ends, and over time we're going to expand the capabilities. And if you were to develop on it, you can see the source code and all the dependencies of the different different components that make this component. And you can see the full commit history by block height. And you can actually go back in time and render the full app based off of the block height that's there. And that's really exciting because if you think about an open source front end, there might be a version that you like that somebody else published, In closed source, it's deprecated, but in open source and hosted on blockchain, all you have to do is just rewind back in time, literally a click, and be able to use that version in your experience. So really allows for developers to get creative in how they build. The second thing that we're building is be able to actually have like a seamless super app experience that has low friction up front, is FastAuth. And this is allowing people through just a simple email plus a passkey using the secure enclave of your phone and a biometric within 7 or 8 seconds to have a fully decentralized identity in this open source operating system. Okay, so ultimately, every super app is a two-sided marketplace between creators and users, and every operating system is the same. So today, we have this alpha.near.org experience where users and developers can meet up to try to build out these experiences. And in the future, we're going to have a bunch of different, you might say, services like microtasks, games, commerce and finance, all multi-chain, and chat, where people are going to be able to go and experience a super app. And you would be able to fork that super app. And maybe you wanted to have your version in your country that hopefully brings more comparative advantage, efficient commerce through a simple user experience. So if you want to chat about Super-dApps, you can connect with me. This is a QR code to my profile. I'll give this for like 10 more seconds. And if you're a developer and you want to go try to make a component on a front end, this is free storage for your first component on our blockchain operating system. So. Cool. So that's what I'm here for, and thank you for your time today.